Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church in Columbia, South Carolina, where we're part of the ELCA. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Perhaps you know the hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. It's a hymn that points to the blessings of God in life, and especially how God accompanies us throughout our life's journey. However, the second verse begins with an interesting line. Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I'm come. I sometimes wonder what people think when they sing that line, especially since there's a church near us with the name Ebenezer. I suspect that most people don't give it much thought. I am often intrigued when I pass by a church and take note of their name on the sign out front. Sometimes with the more unusual names, I wonder why that particular name was chosen for the church. And then I like to speculate on what those who chose that name were thinking. That's what we're up to this week. I've chosen some of the more interesting and rare names that I have seen churches using, and we're exploring where the name came from and speculating why the church might have chosen that name, what it says about that church, or what that church aspires to be. Today I want us to start with churches named Ebenezer. Literally, the name Ebenezer means stone of helping, and it is based in a story from 1 Samuel chapter 7. The Bible story involves a fascinating tale of a time when the Ark of the Covenant was captured in battle. When Israel faced enemies and went into battle, they carried the Ark of the Covenant in front of them, thinking that with the Ark before them, they couldn't lose. It often worked out that way. But one time, after Israel had forsaken God, it didn't, and the ark was captured by the Philistines. Eventually, they returned it, and after about 20 years, Samuel called all the people together, and they fasted and prayed and confessed their sin. Meanwhile, the Philistines learned that Israel had gathered, and they saw an opportunity to attack and wipe the whole nation out. As they attacked, Samuel prayed, and God threw the Philistines into confusion and fear, and they ended up being defeated instead, not by Israel, but by God. Then Samuel set a rock on its end, so it stood like a small monument. He said, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." Samuel named it Ebenezer, a name that means stone of helping, to mark what God had done. Anytime someone saw the stone, they could ask, what does it mean that this stone is in such an unusual position? And then remember how God had been their help in the past. Now, a few things to think about. When Samuel says, "Thus far the Lord has helped us," it is a remembrance of what God has done, to be sure, but it is also an acknowledgement that they aren't finished with their journey. With that in mind, the Ebenezer, the stone of helping, is an assurance that God will continue to be with them as life's journey continues. So when a church is named Ebenezer, that's part of what they are saying. They are saying that God has been their help in the past, and that as they continue their own journey of life, God will continue to be with them and help them. As the song about our fount of blessings says, "Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I'm come." Or to put in more modern terms, here is my monument to remember that I have come this far with God's help, and I will continue on only with God's help. The rock itself symbolizes the strength and unshakability of God's presence and providence. All that makes Ebenezer a pretty good name for a church. I have encountered also a church named Elim, and that's a name that's pretty unusual. But when you learn what happened at Elim, it too makes sense. Elim shows up in the Bible not too long after the Hebrew people are freed from slavery in Egypt. As you know, they crossed the Red Sea into freedom, and the first place they settled in the wilderness had water, but the water wasn't good. It was bitter, and so they called the place Mara, which means bitter. They traveled on until they came to an oasis that had 12 springs of water, plenty enough to provide for all of them. Even more, the place had palm trees. And in one feature of this story that I think points to how desperate and how grateful they were for a place like this with shade, they actually counted the palm trees and wrote down how many there were. The Bible tells us that there were 70 palm trees there. This place was called Elim. Now, if you are looking to name a church, the story of Elim describes a place of rest after difficulty, a place of refreshment and joy, a place of gratitude for all God does in our lives. And that certainly fits the bill. Naming your church Elim means that your church is a sanctuary from life's struggles and a community of joy and refreshment in God's cooling grace. I also know of a church named Enon. Enon was the place where John the Baptist was practicing baptism for the people. In John 3:23 it says, John also was baptizing at Enon near Salem because water was abundant there, and people kept coming and were being baptized. The name Enon means much water, and naming your church that is an important pointer to baptism and how God adopts us as God's children forever. It's a name that points to renewal of faith and to a place of belonging in our communities. Through baptism, we enter the church, and naming your church this tells the people in the church to invite their community, and that there people are welcomed into God's family. So, 3 church names today that all start with the letter E. All 3 speak of God's love and help and grace. Thanks for sharing these moments with me, and remember to let this day belong to God.